Most people think the Norse afterlife ends in Valhalla. A giant hall, endless mead. Every day is leg day and also sword day. But that's just one option. There were others, many others. Some beautiful, some bleak, some baffling. The Norse didn't have a single clear map of the afterlife. They had a patchwork of poems, oral traditions, and sagas, all casually disagreeing with each other. Your soul's final destination. It could depend on how you died, or who noticed you died, or where you were buried, or maybe none of that. Valhalla was just the showiest version, but not everyone went there. In fact, most people didn't. If you weren't heroic, weren't slain in battle, or weren't interesting to Odin, you had options. Some comforting, some chilling, some deeply confusing. There's hell, the underworld, not to be confused with hell. There's Folkvanger, Freyja's peaceful field. There's Niflheim, a cosmic fridge of corpses. And then there's the possibility that you just came back again. Recycled. Soul soup. This video isn't about drama. It's not here to hype Valhalla or rank afterlives like vacation packages. We're going slow. We're wandering. We're getting mildly lost in the muddy, mystical, mostly forgotten details. You'll hear contradictions, half-finished ideas, and beautifully blurry logic. But that's mythology. It's not here to be consistent. It's here to be meaningful. So let's wander together through the afterlives of the Norse cosmos. One soul, many destinations, no promises. In Norse mythology, death wasn't the end. It was more like a crossroad, and also a mystery, and sometimes a bit of a gamble. You died. Your body stopped. But your story, it wandered. To the Norse, a person wasn't just a body with a single soul. They were a collection, a woven braid of parts. The hammer, your shape, the hugger, your mind or mood, the fylgja, your spirit companion, and sometimes the afterganger, a kind of ghostly residue. When someone died, those parts did different things. Some stayed, some left. Some followed bloodlines. Some showed up in dreams. There was no consistent explanation, just strong suggestions. But where you went also depended on how you died. Fell in battle. Valhalla was on the table. Died of sickness? Probably not. Drowned? Maybe hell. Old age? Also hell. The cause of death mattered, but so did who noticed your death. If Odin saw potential in you, he might send a Valkyrie. Not because you were noble, but because he had plans. Valhalla wasn't a reward. It was a draft, and not everyone was drafted. Most people, normal farmers, families, craftsmen, went elsewhere. The Norse had names for these places, but not always descriptions. So the afterlife wasn't just confusing. It was vague. Even the idea of where you go is a little modern. To them, the soul might be shared. One part might linger in the grave. Another part might return in a child. Another part might travel beyond the veil. Nothing was centralized. The Norns may have had a say in it. These three mythic weavers, Urdur, Verdandi, and Skuld, spun the fate of every soul, but they weren't judges. They were observers, recorders, almost like nature itself. Present, but impersonal. So you died, and now you waited for a Valkyrie, waited for a guide, or maybe nothing came. Maybe you simply crossed over, like slipping into a fog. That had always been waiting. There were mentions of a journey, a path, a river, a bridge, a toll. Some described Gjalabru, a bridge that arched over the river Gjöll, guarded by a woman named Modguder, who asked for your name and business. Very polite, really. If you made it past the bridge, you might end up in hell. Not hell, just hell. Cold, damp, grey. A place not of punishment, but of being forgotten. Not cruel, just quiet. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, the soul had to settle, and that could take time. Sometimes the dead didn't go anywhere. They became Draugr, undead figures who lingered near burial mounds. Corporeal, stubborn, cranky. Why did some become Draugr? Hard to say. Maybe improper burial, maybe greed. Maybe they just weren't ready. These weren't ghosts in sheets. They were fully physical, strong, smelly, problematic, and yet some were peaceful. Ancestors who visited in dreams, spirit guides, Fylgjur that warned loved ones of danger, souls that lived alongside the living, just not in visible form. The Norse didn't have one answer for what happened after death. They had many answers, and they didn't always agree. This wasn't a failure, it was flexibility, myth as a mirror, not a rule book. You could go to Valhalla, or Hell, or Folkvanger, or Niflheim, or back into a tree, or nowhere at all. The soul's path wasn't fixed. It was a story, a process, sometimes poetic, sometimes contradictory. So when someone died, the living grieved, but they also waited, watched. Sometimes signs came, dreams, birds, shifts in wind, a cold feeling in the hall. Where no one was standing, funeral rites varied. Some were burned, some buried with grave goods, some placed in ships. The method mattered, not because it guaranteed a destination, but because it helped the living make sense of the leaving. Death was not the end, but it was an end, a doorway, a dispersal. And what happened next? Well, that depended on the myths you remembered, and the ones you believed. Valhalla, the most famous afterlife in Norse mythology, and also the most misunderstood. You've probably heard of it. A majestic hall where warriors feast, fight, and party for eternity. But what actually was Valhalla? And who exactly got in? Well, it's complicated, and a little chaotic, which is perfectly on brand for Norse myth. Let's start with the basics. The word Valhalla comes from the Old Norse Valhöll, meaning Hall of the Slain. It's described as a grand golden hall located in Asgard, home of the gods. Its roof is made of shields. Its walls are spears. Its benches are armor. It's less spa, more Spartan Airbnb. Inside, the chosen dead, called the Einherjar, feast at long tables. They drink endless mead, poured by Valkyries. They eat meat from a magical beast. That regenerates every night. No need for leftovers. The dinner regenerates itself. But this isn't just a never-ending party. It's training. Each morning, the Einherjar march to the field. They fight each other to the death. And then they get back up, fully healed, ready to do it all over again tomorrow. Valhalla is basically CrossFit meets Groundhog Day. So why all the repetition? Because of Ragnarok, the final battle. Odin is gathering an army of the dead to fight alongside the gods. When the world ends, Valhalla isn't a reward. It's a war camp, an eternal boot camp for the end of all things. Now here's the important part. Not everyone gets in. In fact, most people don't. Only those who die in battle and are chosen by Odin are taken to Valhalla, and even among warriors. It's not a guarantee. You could die heroically and still not make the cut. That's where the Valkyries come in. They're not just waitresses with wings. They're Odin's recruiters. They ride over battlefields, choosing who lives and who dies, and more importantly, who's worthy of Valhalla. Sometimes they carry the fallen off the field. Sometimes they just point and let fate do the rest. The Valkyries have names like Mist, Skuld, Gunnar, and Rota. They're not angels. They're not merciful. They're fate in armor, and they answer only to Odin. So if you're chosen, congrats, you're in. If not, well, we'll talk about that in later chapters. But let's say you are picked. You arrive in Valhalla. What then? You join the ranks of the Einherjar, the honored dead. You train by day, feast by night, and wait for the end of the world. It's exhausting, and a little repetitive, but apparently morale is high. It's not clear how time passes there. The sagas don't say. Maybe it feels like centuries. Maybe it feels like a dream. What matters is that you're part of something big, something mythic. You're preparing for the last fight. And honestly, that's kind of motivating. The description of Valhalla mostly comes from two sources, the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, written in medieval Iceland. They don't always agree, and they're not super detailed, but they give us a rough outline. And that's what Norse mythology often is. A sketch, not a blueprint. Valhalla is said to have 540 doors, and through each door, 800 warriors can walk out side by side. That's a lot of fighters, and also a weirdly specific number. Do the math. And that's 432,000 warriors total. Why that number? No one knows. But it sounds impressive. What's also interesting is how gendered Valhalla is. It's a hall of male warriors. There's no mention of women among the Einherjar. Though Valkyries are women, they don't seem to fight in Valhalla. They serve. It reflects the warrior culture of the time, but it also limits who was imagined to be worthy. Still, some sagas hint at women warriors, shield maidens, sometimes chosen by the gods, sometimes left out entirely. It's one of those many Norse maybes that make mythology so slippery. What we know is mostly what was written, and that was filtered. There's also the question, did people want to go to Valhalla? It wasn't exactly peaceful, it wasn't restful, it was intense. You didn't get eternal vacation, you got eternal training, the afterlife equivalent of a combat subscription. But for many, that was the goal. To die with honor, to join Odin's ranks, to fight again in Ragnarok. It gave meaning to death, especially in a culture where violence was frequent and mortality was high. There was also the sense that death wasn't shameful. Only how you died mattered. Falling in battle, glorious, dying of old age, not so much. It wasn't about lifespan, it was about spectacle. Go out swinging, and you might get a golden ticket. Valhalla was, in many ways, a mirror of the ideal Norse life. Feasting, fighting, drinking, storytelling. It made death familiar, less terrifying, almost nostalgic. You didn't leave everything behind. You took it with you, just turned it up to 11. But Valhalla wasn't the only destination, and Odin wasn't the only collector of souls. That's a detail often skipped in pop culture versions of Norse myth, because there's another place, one that gets half the press and almost none of the movies. It's time to meet Freyja and her afterlife, Folkvanger. Valhalla gets all the attention, but there was another place for the dead, quieter, softer, less axe-centric. Folkvanger, Freyja's field. Not a hall, not a pit. A field, wide, peaceful, open. It was everything Valhalla wasn't, and it might have been more popular, if only we'd written more about it. Folkvanger, or Folkvanger in Old Norse, means field of the people, or field of the host. It appears in just a few verses, barely a whisper compared to Odin's loud golden hall. But the details we do have are fascinating. Freyja, goddess of love, war, and death, is said to receive half the dead from battle. Yes, half, split evenly with Odin. They share the fallen. No clear method, no known rules, no draft picks, just shared. The first coin toss in mythological history. This detail comes from the Grimnismal, a poem in the Poetic Edda. There it says, Folkvanga is the ninth, and there Freyja decrees, who shall have seats in the hall? The half of the dead each day does she choose, and half does Othin have. So Freyja chooses, just like Odin, but she gets the other half. This means not all warriors go to Valhalla. In fact, only some do. The rest? They join Freyja in Folkvanga. But what do they do there? That's the mystery. There's no epic description of Folkvanga, no endless mead, no shield ceilings, no daily combat routine, which is kind of refreshing. All we know is that it's a field, a peaceful space, and Freyja is in charge. Her hall is called Sessrumnir, which means seat room or room of many seats. It's located in Folkvanga. So yes, there's still a hall involved, but we don't get a layout. No mention of 540 doors, no golden goat regenerating for dinner, just a place with seats and Freyja. This suggests something different, less militant, more reflective. A place to rest, not train, to gather, not fight. Where Valhalla is about preparation, Folkvanga feels like preservation. It fits Freyja's character. She's associated with war, yes, but also love, beauty, fertility, and magic. She rides a chariot pulled by cats. She cries tears of gold. She owns a necklace that could start a war. Freyja isn't Odin. She doesn't need a battlefield in the afterlife. She might choose the noble dead, for reasons we don't fully understand. Bravery, perhaps, but maybe also tenderness, devotion, loyalty, love. Freyja's criteria are unstated, but they seem less rigid than Odin's, and there's something comforting in that. Not everyone wants to fight forever. Some want peace, stillness, connection. Folkvanga might be that place, a realm where fallen souls don't gear up for Ragnarok, they simply rest. Some scholars speculate that Folkvanga was originally more important than later texts suggest. In older oral traditions, Freyja may have been the primary death goddess. Her role in cedar magic, a powerful, fate-shaping practice, suggests deep links to the unseen world. Over time, as Odin's cult rose, Valhalla may have taken over. The sagas were mostly written by men, monks, poets. Freyja's peaceful field may have faded in favor of Odin's warrior hall, but it never disappeared. It stayed, subtle, serene, and steady. There's also a theory that Folkvanga isn't just for warriors, that Freyja may have welcomed others too. Mothers, lovers, poets, people who died not in battle, but in passion, in loyalty, in sacrifice. Maybe Folkvanga is less about how you died, and more about why. Maybe she chooses based on heart, not sword. And maybe her field isn't just a field of the dead, but a field of the remembered. Unlike Hell's realm, Folkvanga is never described as cold, or damp, or shadowed. No iron gates, no wolves at the edge, just open space, soft grass, possibly flowers. It's vague, yes, but that leaves room to breathe. The dead here don't fight. They don't train. They don't wait for the end of the world. They exist together, peacefully, under Freyja's watch. And maybe that's enough. Not every afterlife needs a purpose. In modern retellings, Folkvanga is often forgotten, even though Freyja shares half the honored dead. It's a case study in how stories are shaped. By what gets repeated. Valhalla gets more poems, more illustrations, more films, Folkvanger gets quiet reverence, but quiet doesn't mean small. If anything, it might make it bigger. Space for more kinds of people, more kinds of endings. A place for warriors who don't want to fight anymore, and for hearts that broke while standing strong. Folkvanger is possibility. It's the maybe that lives next to the known. And while we don't know what happens there, maybe that's the point. It invites the imagination, the soft spaces, the what-ifs, the good endings. So when you think of the Norse afterlife, don't stop at Valhalla, don't stop at swords. Remember the field, the open one, the gentle one, ruled by a goddess who understood that love and war aren't always separate, and that maybe the most honored dead are not the loudest, but the ones who gave everything without needing to be seen. Hell, spelled with one L, and very much not hell. No fire, no pitchforks, no eternal screaming. Just a place, an old, cold place, built for souls the gods didn't need and didn't fear. Hell was the Norse underworld, not a punishment, but a destination. A storage room for the dead, neutral, unlabeled, and a little sad. Let's clear something up early. Hell is both a place and a person, specifically the goddess who rules the realm. Her name. Also Hel. Very efficient branding. She's the daughter of Loki. And the giantess Angerboda. Her siblings, a world serpent, and a giant wolf. Family dinners were probably tense. Hel, the goddess, was said to be half living, half dead, half beautiful, half rotting. Some say her face was split down the middle. Others say her body was part corpse, part woman. She didn't punish souls. She simply kept them. A quiet hostess of the worlds forgotten. Her realm, also called Hel, was located somewhere beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree. Its boundaries were vague, its entrance cold, its streets quiet. The dead arrived there, not in shame, but by default. It was the most common afterlife, the one no one talks about. Hell was for those who didn't die in battle. Old age, sickness, accidents, peaceful sleep. In other words, normal people. Warriors went to Valhalla or Folkvanger. Everyone else? To Hell. So, almost everyone. The road to Hell wasn't easy. It required a journey. One of the few places in Norse myth with consistent structure. First, the dead would cross the river Gjöll, cold, dark, whispering. Then Gjallabru, a bridge of shimmering gold, guarded by a being named Modguder. Modguder was not a gatekeeper, more like a polite checkpoint. She asked questions. Where are you going? What's your name? What business do you have among the dead? Then she let you pass. This wasn't a judgment. It was a ritual. Everyone answered. Everyone moved on. From there, it's less clear. Some say the road led downward, through 9 days of darkness. Others say it curved around the roots of Yggdrasil, into a forgotten land, beneath everything else. The further you traveled, the more memory faded. And eventually, you arrived. There are few descriptions of Hell's realm, but what we know is chilling. It was said to be cold, colorless, sour-smelling. There was a gate, tall, imposing, locked behind the dead. A dog guarded the threshold. Garma. Some say he howled endlessly. Others say he slept. The realm itself had a few named locations. Eldjudnir, Hell's Hall, translated sprayed with snow or damp with sleet. Nice. Her bed was called Kur, meaning sick bed. Her dish, hunger. Her knife, famine. Clearly, she loved a theme. But this was less punishment and more symbolism. The Norse didn't imagine hell as a torture chamber. It was a shadow of life, a lesser version, gray, slow, and still. Not evil, just sad. A place for those who didn't get the fireworks. Hell's role wasn't to hurt the dead. She just kept them, preserved them, let them exist, in a kind of limbo. In some stories, they can still be spoken to, visited, remembered. Hell didn't close the door forever. She just dimmed the light. The dead weren't punished for how they lived. They simply stopped living. No rewards, no lessons, just stillness. A kingdom of the ordinary. And in a way, that was comforting. Because not everyone wants to be a hero. Some just want to rest. Interestingly, the gods respected Hel. They didn't invade her realm. They didn't meddle. Even Odin tread carefully. She was autonomous, unbothered, and surrounded by silence. That kind of power doesn't need a sword, just permanence. In one of the most famous stories, Hel becomes crucial after Baldur's death, Odin's beloved son. The gods send a messenger to Hel to ask for his return. Hel agrees, on one condition. Everything in the world must weep for Baldur, and almost everything does. Trees, stones, animals, clouds, everything mourns, except one being, a giantess named Thok, likely Loki in disguise, refuses. And so Baldur stays in Hel, a god, held gently, not tortured, just there. This shows how Hel was not malevolent. She followed rules, she made terms, she honored death, even for gods. She wasn't chaos, she was structure, unwanted maybe, but necessary. Some modern interpretations equate Hel with the Christian hell, but that's misleading. The Norse hell was not moral. There was no judgment, no fire, no devils. You didn't suffer in hell. You just weren't celebrated. That's it. And for most people, that was fine. In fact, many funeral customs assumed the dead would go to hell. They were buried with goods, with warmth, with care, not in fear, but in reverence. Hell was part of the world, not beneath it. Hell wasn't glamorous. There were no parties, no feasts, no singing warriors slicing each other up for sport. But there was peace, there was space, and for the majority of souls, there was simply presence. That mattered. The Norse didn't see death as a test. It was a transformation, and Hel was one of the most stable afterlife destinations. It didn't shift, didn't demand, it simply received. Not all who arrived there were forgotten. Some became remembered in new ways, through dreams, through rituals. There were stories of communication, living people speaking to the dead answering back, sometimes offering wisdom, sometimes curses. The line between worlds was never sealed, just softened, blurred. Hell wasn't a gate, it was a hallway. Hell also wasn't alone. Her realm might have been part of a larger landscape. Niflheim. Some myths blur the line between Hel and Niflheim. Others say they're distinct. One is personal, the other cosmic. Either way, Hel is its own presence. In Ragnarok, the final battle, Hel plays a subtle role. She doesn't fight, but her realm empties. The dead rise, led by Loki himself, sailing on a ship made of the dead's fingernails. The Naglfar. Yes, it's as strange as it sounds. The dead don't attack as evil. They're not vengeful. They're not demons. They're just moving, stirring, following their path, just as the living do. Even in apocalypse, Hel's order holds. She lets them go, because their time has come. After Ragnarok, Hel fades from the stories. She's not destroyed, not punished, just silent. Her realm exists, but like everything else in the Norse cosmos, its role collapses. Time ends. The dead settle. And myth begins again. Hel's story is not dramatic, but it is dignified. She doesn't offer redemption, doesn't promise rewards. She simply stands, in the quiet, where others look away, and keeps the door open for those who need it. That's her strength, not dominance, but constancy. In a world of battles, feasts, and fiery ends, Hel remains, cool, steady, unchanging, the keeper of endings that don't need fixing, just remembering. There's a strange kind of comfort in that even in myth, there's space for people who don't fit the spotlight, for those who didn't win or fall gloriously or rise again. They still matter. They still get a place. Hel gives us a version of the afterlife that feels real, not better, not worse, just quieter. And in many ways, more human. Because most of us won't die on a battlefield. We'll simply go. And we'll need a place to go to. So Hel holds the forgotten, and by doing so, she keeps them from being erased. She doesn't fix death. She doesn't decorate it. She just makes space for it. And sometimes, that's all we really need. Niflheim. It sounds cold, because it is. Not just in temperature, but in tone. It's not a place of fire or torment. It's something worse, a kind of cosmic shrug. The basement of the universe, gray, frozen, forgotten. If Valhalla is a banquet, Niflheim is a storage unit where the light never quite reaches. Niflheim translates roughly to mist home or mist world, one of the oldest realms in Norse mythology, one of the first to exist, alongside Muspelheim, the realm of fire. Together, they shaped creation. Their clash birthed the cosmos. But while fire danced into being, Niflheim just stayed cold. In the cosmological layout, Niflheim sits low, beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, beneath Hel, beneath memory, beneath motion. It's where water collects, ice thickens, and stories slow down. The realm of stillness, not death, but pre-death. An afterthought's afterthought. So why do some souls end up there? That's a mystery. There are hints in the sagas that Niflheim was a destination for the worst. Oath-breakers, cowards, traitors. Not punished, just placed. Away from everything. Stored. But these texts don't agree. And scholars debate whether Niflheim was really separate from Hel, or just a moodier neighborhood. Some poems use the names interchangeably. Others clearly divide them. One cold and neutral, the other cold and cursed. Either way, it's not a place you choose. Snorri Sturluson, our medieval myth compiler, links Niflheim to a very specific horror, the dragon Nidhogg, a soul-gnawing serpent who chews corpses at the base of Yggdrasil. In some versions, he lives in Niflheim. In others, he visits. Either way, he's hungry. Nidhogg isn't there to punish. He's just doing what dragons do, gnawing, breaking, digesting what's already gone. It's not hellfire, it's decomposition, cosmic composting. Niflheim isn't evil. It's inevitable. It's the last stop, when nothing else wants you. There's something eerie about that. No judges, no trials, no redemption arcs, just mist and cold and silence. It doesn't scream, it doesn't burn, it forgets. In Niflheim, souls may not suffer, but they don't thrive either. They exist like static, flickering, low, background noise in a mythic universe, a fate not of pain, but of absence, not remembered, not feared, just misplaced. Some stories describe Niflheim as containing the well Fergelmir, a roaring spring from which many rivers flow, including the ones that wrap around the world and the rivers that freeze into Helheim. It's a source and a sink, which makes Niflheim a strange contradiction, a beginning. That feels like an ending. This makes Niflheim unique. It's part of the origin story and the garbage disposal. Creation started here, and some souls end here. It holds the past, and what gets discarded. Not a punishment, but a cooling-off point for things that ran out of story. There's no throne, no goddess, no daily schedule. You don't get Valkyries in Niflheim, or feasts, or trials, just a flat horizon of cold air, and the faint sound of a dragon chewing on memories. And somehow, that's scarier than fire, because what's more terrifying than pain? Being forgotten. In Niflheim, you're not screamed at. You're erased gently, one breath at a time. You fade, without drama, without audience. You become a footnote. But again, this wasn't always framed as evil. The Norse viewed these places as part of the world. Every realm had a purpose. Niflheim's was entropy, slow decay, loss, the long silence after the last word. No malice, just momentum. And even here, there's meaning. Maybe a soul ends up in Niflheim, not as punishment, but because it doesn't fit anywhere else. Not brave, not wicked, not cursed, just incomplete. A myth with no ending. That's not failure. It's a possibility. Because even in Niflheim, the world doesn't stop. Its rivers still run. Its mists still swirl. Its silence still echoes. Maybe it's not the basement. Maybe it's the pause, the blank space between chapters. If Valhalla is the heroic epic, and Hell is the quiet waiting room, then Niflheim is the storage cloud of mythic existence. It holds what can't be categorized, not honored, not condemned, just placed. Because not everything needs a story. Some things simply settle. It's easy to imagine Niflheim as cruel, but it's not. It's honest. It doesn't promise justice, or reunion, or rebirth. It just is. A reminder that not all endings are dramatic. Some just conclude. One poetic source, Vafthrudnismal, mentions that after death, the worst go to Nastrond, translated as corpse shore. Possibly part of Niflheim, possibly next door, possibly metaphorical. It's described as a cold shore, where liars, oath-breakers and murderers suffer. But the line between myth and metaphor is thin. In this shoreline vision, poison drips from ceilings, wolves howl, the dragon Nidhogg gnaws at corpses. It's vivid, gruesome, and brief. But is it real, or just a poetic threat, meant to keep people in line? Scholars still debate. Even if Nastrond is part of Niflheim, it's not its whole story. Because most of Niflheim isn't hostile. It's just indifferent, not malevolent, not nurturing. A realm of mythic apathy, where stories go, to grow cold and quiet. There's beauty in that too, because sometimes being left alone is its own kind of peace. No judgments, no corrections, just cold honesty. Here the soul doesn't fight or feast. It fades, but not instantly, gently, like snow in slow sunlight. The Norse saw this realm as ancient, timeless. It existed before the world began. It will exist after it ends. It's not the bottom, it's the edge, where time forgets what it was measuring, and myths stop keeping track. In the grand cosmology of Norse myth, every place has its rhythm, its season, its silence. Valhalla sings, Hell whispers, Niflheim hums, low, steady, constant. It's the oldest lullaby, unheard, but always playing. And it has no ruler, no hell, no Odin, no Jotun king, just ice and rivers and fog that thinks in circles. You're not guided. You're not guarded. You're just present until you're not. This makes Niflheim more existential than theological. It doesn't explain the soul. It doesn't reward or punish. It absorbs. It holds the leftover data. After the story's been deleted, and in its own way, it preserves things by not asking anything of them. What kind of soul ends up here? Maybe the ones who refused the call, who stepped out of the saga, who didn't choose heroism or treachery or even love. Just the quiet ones, the ones who slipped through. And that's not failure. That's another way of being. There's a space in mythology for those who weren't central. The background characters, the overlooked, the ones who didn't stand out, but still mattered. Niflheim might be where those souls go. Not as exile, but as home. It's interesting that in a myth system, so concerned with fate and destiny, Niflheim exists at all. It suggests that not all paths are tracked, that some things fall outside the pattern and are still okay, still part of the design. In that way, Niflheim is the mythic equivalent of a deep breath, a moment of pause. After too much meaning, not everything needs to teach us something. Some places are just there, for when you're tired of being significant. And even in that silence, there's dignity. You're not erased. You're not ridiculed. You're just placed. Somewhere soft, cold, still. And the world continues. With or without you. But always with a space. That held you once. So if hell is memory, Niflheim is absence. If Valhalla is glory, Niflheim is stillness. If Folkvanger is peace, Niflheim is quiet surrender. And sometimes, that's exactly what a soul needs, a final destination, without expectation. The Norse weren't known for crystal-clear afterlife logistics, but in all their contradictions, there's one quietly fascinating idea that pops up again and again. Souls don't just leave, they return. Not always, not clearly, but enough times to make you wonder. What if death wasn't final? What if you circled back? Rebirth in Norse mythology isn't front and center. It's not structured. Like in Hinduism or Buddhism, there's no soul scorecard, no cosmic report card. But at core, there are hints, scattered phrases in sagas, subtle suggestions, characters who act like echoes, like a soul, took a second lap. Let's start with the concept of hugr, loosely translated as mind, or will, or sometimes soul. The hugr isn't a fixed thing. It can leave the body, wander in dreams, visit others, and yes, maybe, find a new home. The idea of a soul moving between people wasn't shocking to the Norse. They didn't see identity as single-threaded. You were made of parts, and those parts could be recycled, passed on, shared, inherited. Not genetically, but mythically. Some sagas suggest that ancestors are reborn in their descendants, not metaphorically, literally. A child is born, and someone whispers, he has his grandfather's spirit. And it isn't small talk, it's considered real. A continuation, not just of blood, but of being. In the Helgi poems, a hero named Helgi dies, and later, another Helgi is born. The text implies it's the same soul, a returning warrior, same name, same fate. A soul, repeating itself, not as punishment, but as pattern. This rebirth isn't celebrated or feared. It's just noted like a cycle that some souls choose or are drawn into. There's no cosmic judgment, no gods assigning rebirth. It's quieter than that, like the wind, remembering an old direction. Another part of the soul is the Freyja, a spirit double, often appearing as an animal. The Freyja can pass from person to person, especially through families. Some say it rides the bloodline. Others say it chooses its host. Either way, it connects lives, links identities, moves through time, like a quiet thread. This idea that parts of you can persist, even without your body, adds a new texture to Norse death. The body may burn, the grave may sink, but something else keeps moving, in dreams, in names, in behavior. You, but not you. Again, there's also the hammer, the shape or form of a person. In some texts, it can be sent out, like a projection, and possibly retained or reused. A shape that lingers, that finds new life in someone else's outline. It's not resurrection, it's more like resonance. Some scholars have pointed to cedar magic as the mechanism for this. Cedar, practiced mostly by women, and Odin, notably, was a kind of fate working. It could alter paths, bend wills, and perhaps move souls. Magic that threads one life into another, with care or chaos. In stories, we see characters dream of the dead, not ghosts, but memories so strong, they feel like reincarnation. The dead appear in visions, in weather, in posture, in prophecy, and sometimes they never really left. They just found new eyes to look through. Modern readers might ask, is this reincarnation? Kind of. But the Norse weren't systematic. They didn't write manuals, they told poems. So instead of rules, we get images, suggestions, and strange patterns, enough to make us wonder. Did they believe in returning? Or did they just know that nothing ever fully goes away? Rebirth in Norse myth wasn't assigned. It wasn't judgmental. It just happened, like a river that loops, without asking permission. And in this worldview, that felt natural. Everything moved in cycles, seasons, sagas, souls. The world itself had a cycle. The Norse cosmos was born, burned, and reborn again. After Ragnarok, even the gods weren't immune. So why wouldn't a human soul follow the same rhythm? Why shouldn't a life be one part of a longer loop? Some believed that names held power. Naming a child after an ancestor might guide a piece of that soul back. It wasn't superstition, it was invitation. And if the child looked or behaved like the ancestor, that was proof. Proof the spirit had found its way again, worn a new face, but kept old memories. In this light, your soul becomes more than yours. It's a guest, a traveler, a story that moves through many voices. You don't own it. You host it for a time. And then it moves on. No flames, no gates, just transition. This brings up questions. If your soul returns, is it still you? Or just echoes of you? Do you remember anything? Or do you walk through the world, haunted by feelings that don't quite belong? Memories that aren't yours, longings that don't make sense. There's a word for this, hamingja. It doesn't translate cleanly, but it's often defined as luck or fortune, the kind that travels with a person or a family. Some believe the hamingja could be inherited, passed down. Good luck, bad luck, strength of will, all recycled. This wasn't morality. It wasn't karma. It was momentum. The soul carried force, And that force could shift into the next generation, a spiritual hand-me-down, with all the wear and power that implies. Rebirth wasn't escape. It wasn't reward. It was continuation. Not everything got resolved. Not everything started fresh. Some souls picked up where they left off, mid-sentence, mid-song, and the next life had to finish the verse. In this system, death is porous, not a door but a veil, thin enough for things to pass through. And they did, quietly, frequently, without ceremony, like fog slipping under a threshold. These beliefs weren't written as doctrine. They were embedded in daily life, naming traditions, dream interpretations, storytelling rhythms, a worldview where no life was isolated, no death, final, everything braided together, over time, over blood, over memory. Even burial practices reflect this. Some bodies were burned, others buried. Sometimes they were buried with tools or items meant to be used again. A sword for another battle, a cup for another feast. As if death wasn't goodbye, just recess. It's worth noting that these beliefs weren't universal. Different regions, different eras, different storytellers. Some may have feared rebirth, others may have hoped for it. But the pattern shows up enough times to leave an impression. Souls move, spirits return, life echoes. There are no neat explanations. The Norse weren't trying to systematize, they just observed. When a child behaved like an ancestor, they noticed. When a name brought back a feeling, they leaned into it. And the myths grew around those moments. Soft, suggestive, strange. So maybe the Norse believed that souls aren't permanent identities, but experiences, happenings. They pass through time, like wind through trees, stirring, shaping, and leaving behind just enough to begin again. When someone died in the Norse world, you didn't just cry, you prepared, because death didn't always stay put. The body might be gone, but the spirit, not guaranteed to rest. It might linger, it might return, and not always as a welcome guest. Funerals weren't just rituals, they were precautions, a way to honor the dead, yes, but also a way to convince them to stay where they belonged. Because in Norse belief, not all the dead were content. Some held on. Hard. The restless dead had a name, Draugr. They weren't ghosts, not misty or transparent. They were physical, solid, heavy, strong, sometimes bloated, sometimes pale, always wrong, like a body that didn't understand it was done. The Draugr were usually buried people who came back, not to haunt, but to interfere, guarding treasure, watching over their graves, or just being unpleasant, unmoving in death, unwelcome in life, and very difficult to get rid of. Stories say they could smash doors, crush chests, or simply sit on a person until they stopped struggling. But they didn't always harm. Sometimes they just loomed, sat in the hall, stared at the living, refused to leave, like a nightmare, with no beginning. Which brings us back to funerals, because Norse people took serious steps to stop this sort of thing. Start with the grave itself. Bodies were often buried with grave goods, weapons, food, valuables. Not just kindness, a bribe, a payoff, a reason not to come back. The dead were sometimes buried, with their nails trimmed, their eyes closed, their limbs bound. In some cases, they were staked down or weighed with stones, not for decomposition, but for containment, just in case. Some bodies were buried, with scissors or iron across their chests, Iron was thought to keep restless forces away. In a few tales, graves were salted, or the burial mound was circled, a certain number of times, clockwise, always clockwise, to seal things in. Ship burials were common for the elite, the dead placed in a boat, set aflame, or buried beneath a mound. The boat wasn't just for the journey, it was a vessel that contained the soul, anchoring it to its rightful place, not to return. There's even mention of decapitating the body and placing the head between the knees, not out of disrespect, out of fear. The belief that if the Draugr rose, they wouldn't be able to find themselves, uncertain, disoriented, stuck. These weren't evil spirits. They were stubborn ones, people who couldn't let go of land, of family, of pain. And the living were cautious, respectful, but firm. They wanted the dead to rest, not roam. Sometimes the Draugr returned because something was unresolved, a feud, a betrayal, a stolen item. Sometimes it wasn't dramatic, just someone who wasn't ready to be forgotten. And so they came back, in their own silent way. In the Grettis saga, there's a famous Draugr named Kar. He guards his burial mound, territorial, powerful, unmoving, until someone brave enough comes to deal with him, and even then, not without struggle. These stories were warnings and puzzles. Not all dead were Draugr, some were simply felt. A chair rocking on its own, a door opening without sound, a shadow moving, just at the edge of vision. The Norse didn't explain these things with fear, but with acceptance. The dead lingered. It happened. Sometimes they appeared in dreams, sometimes in the corner of a longhouse where no one liked to sit. The dead had their ways, and as long as you respected them, kept the grave clean, honored their memory, left offerings, they stayed quiet, usually. Funeral feasts helped too, food and drink shared, in the dead's honor, a way of saying, we remember you, you're still part of us, but stay where you are. Please. Death wasn't a wall, it was a river, and rivers flood. So you built rituals, like sandbags, to keep the banks in place, to protect both sides. And sometimes, you just hoped for calm water. Funerals weren't final. They were the beginning of a new relationship. The living stepped carefully, watched the wind, listened for creaks in the hall, when no one was walking. The dead might be gone, but they weren't gone. And if they returned, they came without knocking. Some homes even built in safeguards, doors for the dead, low, narrow, hidden. These weren't meant to be used. They were symbolic, a polite exit, for souls still unsure where to go. If you gave them a door, maybe they wouldn't need to force their way back in. There are tales of shepherds hearing footsteps on empty hillsides, of children speaking to old friends no one else could see, of sudden unexplained illness after visiting a grave. These stories weren't proof of fear. They were instructions. Pay attention. Tread lightly. The Norse didn't just bury the dead. They placed them, with intention, facing the right direction, lined with meaningful items. Graves weren't boxes. They were statements. This person mattered. This person was known. Let them rest. With dignity. Let them stay. Sometimes people suspected a Draugr was causing harm. Crops failing, livestock dying, bad dreams spreading like frost. When that happened, they acted. The grave might be reopened. The body checked if unnatural signs appeared. They took steps, heavy stones, ritual fire, reburial far from home. But that wasn't cruelty. It was balance. The dead deserved peace, and so did the living. If the dead reached too far, the living responded, not with hatred, with resolve, because harmony matters, on both sides of the veil. Still, most funerals went without issue. A soft goodbye, a warm mound, a story shared over ale, a moment, when everyone paused, because someone had crossed over. And now, the world was just slightly quieter. Cremation was also practiced, ash scattered or stored in burial urns. The fire, they believed, freed the spirit. Smoke rose, and with it, the parts of the soul that still needed to fly. No tomb, no shadow, just release. But even ashes had presence. Urns were placed in significant spots, near homes, at crossroads, beside rivers. The location mattered. Souls didn't vanish, they watched, protected, or warned, depending on who they were in life. Grave goods tell us a lot. Men buried with swords, women with keys, children with toys or charms. But also shared items, food for the journey, cups for drinking, rings passed down, things the living would miss, but chose to let go, because the dead needed to feel whole too. One recurring object, Thor's hammer pendants, sometimes worn, sometimes placed in graves, a symbol of protection, of belonging, of strength, maybe a charm to keep danger away, or maybe a key to somewhere better. And then there's the mound itself. Mounds weren't just burial markers. They were places of presence. Some people avoided them, others visited them, laid flowers, whispered secrets, asked for dreams, because the person inside wasn't entirely silent. Mounds hummed in their own way. In some tales, the dead in mounds could speak, not always clearly, not always kindly, but they had opinions, especially about land, inheritance, and unfinished family business. Respect the mound, and you stayed safe. Ignore it, and the wind might speak your name. The boundary between life and death was never sealed. It fluttered, shifted, responded to ritual, to grief, to memory. The Norse accepted this, and they shaped their lives with that awareness. The dead were nearby, but only if you gave them reason to stay. So funerals weren't the end. They were maintenance, the ongoing work of keeping the world balanced, of giving the dead their place, so the living could keep theirs. It wasn't superstition, it was structure, and everyone played their part. Ragnarok, the end of the world, but not in fire and brimstone, not exactly. It's colder, stranger, more inevitable than violent. The Norse didn't believe the world would end once. They believed it had always been ending. The world came with an expiration date. Ragnarok means fate of the gods. Not their triumph, not their rule, their end. The myths don't flinch from this. They look it straight in the eye and tell the story anyway. Because endings are part of everything, even divine things. It begins with signs, long winters, no harvests, brothers turning on brothers, fathers no longer knowing their sons. The bonds break, and with them, the world begins to splinter. No villain, just unraveling, like threads pulled too tight, for too long. Then the monsters rise. Fenrir, the wolf, Jörmungandr, the world serpent. Hell opens her gates. The ship Naglfar sets sail. The dead move. The sky breaks. Giants walk again. The old rules fall away. And what's left is collision. This isn't evil, not in a moral sense. It's cosmic necessity, the natural return of chaos. The cycle demands a reset. The gods had their time. Now time demands it back. And so they fight. because that's the only thing left to do. The gods don't survive. Most of them fall. Odin is swallowed by Fenrir. Thor kills the serpent, but takes only 9 steps before falling to its venom. Loki and Heimdall destroy each other. Frey falls without his sword. Tyr, silent as ever, meets his final match. The world itself trembles, mountains collapse, the sky splits, the sea swallows the land. Even the sun and moon are devoured by wolves. No light, no warmth, no sky, only the groaning earth and the echo of old songs. But what about the dead? What happens to Valhalla, to Folkvanger, to Hell? Do they fight? Do they fall? The myths are quiet on this, but there are clues, soft ones, enough to follow. Valhalla empties. The Einherjar, the fallen warriors, march out through 540 doors. Odin's army. They join the gods and fall beside them. This was always their purpose, not to rest, not to feast, but to end gloriously. Folkvanger's fate is unwritten, but if Freyja falls, her field fades. Those under her care may disappear gently. No battle, no fire, just silence, and wind over tall grass, like a dream, slipping past the moment of waking. Hell releases her dead. They rise beneath Loki's banner, not with rage, not with rebellion, just movement, as if summoned by a deeper current. Not evil, not broken, just returning to the shape of the end. What happens to Hel herself? No one says. She might remain, she might vanish, or perhaps she's the only one who endures in a world without gods, without names, the last to hold memory when even the stars go out. Niflheim, it doesn't burn. It wasn't warm to begin with. Maybe it cracks, maybe it deepens, maybe it stays exactly the same. The untouched archive, beneath the wreckage, still misty, still cold, still waiting. After the end, there is stillness, and then green. A field rises from the broken earth. Not the same world, but something new. 2 humans survive, hidden in the tree of life. They walk again, under a sun, reborn. Some gods return, Balder, Hodor, sons of Thor, not resurrected, but reintroduced, like stories that took a break, not to be fixed, but retold, with new words. And that's the quiet truth of Ragnarok. It ends everything and starts again, not because of hope, not because of reward, because it's the shape of things. Birth, battle, break, and bloom. The afterlife doesn't escape Ragnarok. It's part of it, unfolded, released, but not destroyed, not cursed, just reset. Some doors close, others creak open, and what steps through might feel familiar. So much is lost in Ragnarok, and yet the stories never fully close the book. Even at the end, there's a whisper of beginning, of something small, taking root, where fire once stood. Because in Norse myth, nothing ends without the possibility of returning. The gods fall, but some survive. Vidar and Vali, sons of Odin, Modi and Magni, sons of Thor, Balder and Hodor, returned from Hel. Together they build again, a hall on Idavol, peaceful, bright. The gods no longer fight. They remember. They speak of the past, of their fathers, of the wolf, of the serpent, not in fear, not in anger, but with the slow reverence of survivors, telling the story to keep the shape of it alive. Even pain, becomes part of the myth. The sun is reborn too. Her daughter rises in her place, a new light, for a new sky. And beneath it, the world regrows. Forests, streams, mountains healed of fire, like breath. After too much silence, the humans, Leaf and Lifthrasir, emerge from the world tree. They've hidden in its bark, drank dew, waited. They walk into the new world, with no weapons, no titles, just memory. They will begin the world again, slowly and differently. No one says where the old dead go, the ones from hell, from Valhalla, from Niflheim. Do they return, or do they watch? The myths are vague, but they suggest that nothing is truly erased, only transformed. In some fragments, a golden age follows Ragnarok. No grief, no betrayal, just order and light. It's brief, mostly unpainted, but it's there, a final stanza, in a long poem, that mostly describes thunder. And perhaps that's the point. Ragnarok doesn't promise peace. It doesn't preach salvation. It shows the cost of being, that even gods can fall, that endings can burn, and still, a single blade of grass can grow again, without needing applause. Some think Ragnarok is a warning, but maybe it's a comfort. That destruction is not the same as failure. That time can bend, crack, and still hold shape. That even when the world ends, there's always something left to tell the next one, even if it's only a whisper. With all the halls, fields, and shadowy realms, it's easy to ask, where did they really think you went? Not in poems, not in sagas, but in the quiet moments, after someone passed, when the fire dimmed and the grief felt real. What did the Norse believe? The truth is, they weren't sure, and they didn't need to be. Their myths weren't about answers. They were about options. Maps sketched in fog. A series of maybes. Because people don't always want certainty. Sometimes they just want a direction. In Iceland, they buried the dead facing west, toward the unknown, toward whatever came next. It wasn't a doctrine. It was a gesture, a quiet message. Wherever you're going, go in peace, and may it be somewhere worth reaching. Some families hoped for Valhalla. Others whispered of Folkvanger. Some simply said, "He's gone to hell." And that was enough. Not in fear, not in shame, just fact. The way one says, he went to sea, and we may never know if he'll return. Different households told different stories, depending on what they feared, or hoped, or remembered from childhood. One family might speak of Valkyries, another of ancestors. Another might just say, "He's part of the wind now." And all of them would be telling the truth. Because belief wasn't singular. It was layered, not a monolith, a mosaic. A collection of fragments, handed down across generations. Some borrowed, some bent, all worn smooth, from being spoken so often. So where did people go when they died? Sometimes Valhalla, sometimes hell, sometimes Niflheim, sometimes back into a newborn child's smile, sometimes nowhere at all. But even then, they went somewhere, even if that place was memory. The Norse knew the dead stayed close, in the shape of a cloud, the turn of a phrase, the scent of pine on a cold morning. Signs, small ones, but enough to feel the shape of someone, still sitting nearby. Even if their chair was empty, there were rituals, yes, and names and graves, but also There was letting go. The understanding that death was part of the pattern, not a glitch, not a punishment, a return to a part of the world without roads. So maybe they didn't believe in one single destination. They believed in presence, that a soul didn't vanish. It folded into the world, its pieces taken up by trees, stories, snowfall, a different kind of eternity, one that didn't need a gate or a guide. In the end, Norse beliefs weren't so much about where you went, but how you were remembered. Memory was its own afterlife. The sagas didn't promise reunion. They promised that names could last. And if someone still spoke yours, you hadn't really gone. Not yet. This is why legacy mattered. Not for glory, but for presence. To live on, not in halls of gold, but in everyday retellings. He was brave. She was kind. They once did something worth saying again. That was enough. In some poems, the dead speak through dreams. Not warnings, just presence. A quiet word, a knowing glance, a feeling that drifts across your shoulder, like wind before a storm. They don't need to shout. They just need to be noticed. Even the gods weren't immune to this. Odin sought knowledge from the dead. He raised a seeress from her burial mound to ask about the future. She answered, then asked to return to rest. Even in death, the dead wanted peace. The living knew not to ask too much. You could visit the edge, but not linger. Respect the silence between here and there. Crossing back was not a gift. It was a disturbance. And not all disturbances are forgiven. Some souls became land vetter, spirit protectors of place, mountains, fields, coasts. They didn't leave the world, they became part of it. And to walk through that land was to walk in the presence of those who had shaped it, quietly, endlessly. Others became stories, not myths, but local legends. Old Bjorn still walks the woods. Grandmother watches over the hearth, not said with fear, said with care and recognition. These souls didn't leave. They stayed near, because someone needed them to. So where did they think you went? Somewhere that suited who you were. Somewhere that matched your ending. Somewhere that felt like home, even if it wasn't marked on a map. The dead didn't go away. They simply changed address. And the living kept the light on. Modern minds want neat answers. But the Norse world was comfortable with the in-between. Fog, dream, the half-seen. They didn't explain the afterlife. They walked beside it. And in that space, faith became softer, more honest, and more enduring. By now, it's clear. The Norse afterlife wasn't a straight path. It was a forest, dense, winding, full of turns that lead in opposite directions and sometimes loop back. And maybe that was the point. The dead didn't go to one place. They went to many, because people live differently, and so they should rest differently too. This wasn't a single destination. It was a system of possibilities. A web, not a wall. A cycle, not a staircase. Valhalla, Folkvanga, Hell, Niflheim, maybe even rebirth. Each with its own mood, its own silence, its own meaning. The warrior's rest, the field of peace, the cold archive, the echoing pause before memory fades, and the thread that pulls a soul into a new body, or a new role, or maybe just into a story someone keeps telling after the fire goes out. That's the shape of the Norse afterlife. Not a reward, not a punishment, a reflection. of the life you lived, the way you left, and the people who remained, to speak your name, or light a candle, or leave a small stone by your door. Each realm said something different. Valhalla said, "You matter because you fought." Folkvanger said, "You matter because you loved." Hell said, "You matter even if no one noticed." Niflheim said, "You mattered. Once. And that's still something." Together they created a spiritual geography, the kind only made by oral tradition, the kind that shifts when you walk it, that remembers you, as long as someone remembers how the path felt, beneath their feet. Not doctrine, but presence, the kind you feel. When you don't know why the air feels colder in one room than the rest. The afterlife wasn't distant, it was local, in burial mounds, in wind patterns, in the way someone stared too long, into the trees at dusk. They didn't need temples, they had land, and in that land, they placed their dead and their stories, and both stayed. That's why so many souls don't leave cleanly in Norse myth. The Draugr, the whispers, the footsteps behind you, when no one else is walking. The boundary between the worlds was never sealed. It just wavered, depending on how much the dead still wanted to say. Even Ragnarok didn't erase everything. It reset it, tore it down, so something new could rise, but not from nothing. From memory, from fragments, from the quiet promise that not all endings are losses. Some are simply openings, with the lights turned low. The Norse people didn't need perfection in their vision of the afterlife. They needed possibility, enough room to imagine, a world where the brave feasted, the gentle rested, the quiet drifted, and the forgotten found themselves again in the next bloom of spring. The Norse afterlife wasn't just about the dead, it was about the living, how they acted, how they remembered, how they navigated a world they believed was always half-haunted, because the afterlife wasn't out there. It was here, in the hearth, in the wind, in the quiet after a name is spoken, and no one answers. To believe in Valhalla was to believe that honor mattered, that your death could mean something, that courage carried weight, not just in stories, but in the shape of eternity. So warriors lived as if someone was watching, and maybe someone was. A Valkyrie, a god, a future storyteller. To believe in Folkvanger was to believe in gentler strengths, that love could shape a soul's destination, that kindness had its own gravity, and that not all greatness had to shout. Freyja's field welcomed the soft-hearted, the devoted, the strong in a quieter way, and that made people think differently about what mattered. To believe in hell was to believe in balance, that most people weren't heroes or villains, just people, and they still deserved a place, a room, a name. Even if no saga was written about them, the Norse made space for the unremarkable, and that made their world feel more whole. To believe in Niflheim was to accept that some souls fade, that some endings come without ceremony. It wasn't cruel, it was honest. Not everyone stays in memory, not everything is remembered, but even those souls had a place, and that too was a kind of respect. So much of Norse life was shaped by these quiet beliefs. The way a grave was placed, the way a name was given, the way the dead were spoken to, as if they could still hear. And maybe they could. The myths say nothing against it. Folk traditions kept the dead close, not out of fear, out of love, out of the idea that those who've left aren't truly gone until we stop talking about them, and even then, they might still listen, or guide, or guard, softly. When someone died, they weren't abandoned, they were released, but slowly, with stories, with songs, with the shaping of a grave mound. That said, you were here, you mattered, we still see you, in the stars, or in the smoke, or in the silence. The living made decisions, based on where they believed the soul would go. Should he be buried, burned, named again in a child? What did his Huga deserve? What would his Freyja do now? And would his spirit walk with us in the snow this winter? Or rest without the need to return? The afterlife wasn't separate from daily life. It was woven in. The edge of the forest, the cold in the wind, the strange dream. That didn't feel like yours. The Norse didn't ask if the dead were still near. They asked, what do they need? So they'll leave us in peace. The Norse afterlife wasn't a final answer. It was a mirror, held up not just to the dead, but to the living. You saw your values reflected, your hopes, your regrets, your questions that never really left. Each realm said something about what mattered while you were still alive. In Valhalla, you saw glory, the hunger to be remembered, to make your exit count, but also the fear of being ordinary, of slipping into hell without a fight, without applause. And maybe that's why Valhalla felt so loud, because it had to drown out doubt. In Folkvanger, you saw intimacy, the hope that quiet goodness was enough, that loyalty, love, grief, and gentleness could also earn you a place to land. It asked nothing more than a full heart and a life lived with care, and that felt like permission. In Hell, you saw the truth of most endings, unremarkable, not tragic, not heroic, just human, a soft descent into a realm that did not judge or celebrate, a room with a chair and a silence that asked nothing of you except to rest. In Niflheim, you saw the fear of forgetting, of being forgotten, the place for those no one could speak of anymore. It wasn't punishment, it was erosion. But even then, you existed as cold, as drift, as the possibility that someone, someday, might remember again. The Norse Afterlife was not a reward system. It was an emotional map. Each realm carried a different kind of sorrow and a different kind of peace. And by acknowledging all of them, they made death feel less absolute, more varied, more honest, more human. Because death is not one thing, it's many. It's the warrior's shout, the mother's goodbye, the lost traveler's quiet departure, the ancestors' sigh as they pass their name on, and hope someone says it again. Each one, a different exit. Each one, a different after. And so, the Norse gave us options, even if they contradicted each other, even if they overlapped, because people are different, and death should be too. We don't all need the same story. We need the one that fits us, even if it only fits for a moment. So where did they think you went? Everywhere. Somewhere. Nowhere. And that was okay, because what mattered was not your final location. It was how you lived, how you left, and how they remembered you after the fire dimmed. You've wandered through fog, across golden halls, into deep-rooted silence, and beyond the edge of memory. You've met the gods, walked beside the forgotten, and listened to how the Norse imagined what happens after the story ends. There were many places, none perfect, none final, just possible. A quiet system of maybe, enough to hold the sorrow, enough to carry the mystery, enough to remind us we don't need to know. We just need to feel that something waits. You can let it go now. The questions, the stories, the names of places you may never say again, let them settle like a stone on soft earth or a whisper left in the air for no one in particular. As the final words fade, you may hear the sound of rain gently arriving. Let it keep you company. Let it carry you into sleep or thought or stillness. No direction, no destination, just the rhythm of something continuing long after the voices have paused. Thank you for listening. Rest well, and if the rain takes you with it, let it. You've already heard everything you needed to.